I've been looking at ocean biodiversity. That's the diversity of species that live in the world's oceans. About 20 years ago, biologists developed the idea of what they called biodiversity hotspots. These are the areas which have the greatest mixture of species. So, one example is Madagascar. These hotspots are significant because they allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. Biologists can identify hotspots on land fairly easily, but until recently, very little was known about species distribution and diversity in the oceans, and no one even knew if hotspots existed there. Then a Canadian biologist called Boris Worm did some research in 2005 on data on ocean species that he got from the fishing industry. Worm located 5 hotspots for large ocean predators like sharks and looked at what they had in common. The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food. But to his surprise, that was only
ở đây chúng ta có là always rich in, rich là giàu đúng không? Thì nó kêu là high concentration. Em biết cái chữ concentration mình dịch là gì không? Cái nồng độ nha. Thường ở trong hóa học mình dịch là cái nồng độ, được chưa? Còn ở trong các cái liên quan về sinh học á, concentration đó em nha, nói sao viết vậy, concentration, được chưa? Thì bình thường mình biết nó là sự tập trung đúng không? Thì nó nói mình có thể dịch nó là sự tập trung cao của gì đó luôn, được chưa? Còn nếu trong hóa học thì nó sẽ dịch là nồng độ cao, được chưa? Vậy thì ở đây nó kêu là high concentration of food, nghĩa là có cái độ tập trung về thức ăn cao. Hiểu được chưa? Có nghĩa là nhiều cái con động vật để mà đi săn á, được săn á, gọi là thú ăn thịt á, những con để ăn thịt.
The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food.
Hiểu được chưa?
But to his surprise, that was only true for 4 of the hotspots.
4 cái thôi thì không phải lúc nào nó cũng giàu thức ăn. Hiểu được chưa?
Was quite badly off in that regard.
Số 3 này, nhiệt
But
độ
what
cao.
he did find was that in all cases, the water at the surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures, even when it was cool at greater depths. So, this seemed to be a factor in supporting a diverse range of these large predators. However, this wasn't enough on its own, because he also found that the water needed to have enough oxygen in it. So these 2 factors seemed necessary to support the high metabolic rate of these large fish. A couple of years later, in 2007, a researcher called Lisa Balance, who was working in California, also started looking for ocean hotspots, but not for fish. What she was interested in was marine mammals, things like seals. And she found 3 places in the oceans which were hotspots. And what these had in common was that these hotspots were all located at boundaries between ocean currents.
Em biết ocean current
and this seems to be the sort of place that has lots of the plankton that some of these species feed on. So now people who want to protect the species that are endangered need to get as much information as possible. For example, there's an international project called the Census of Marine Life. They've been surveying oceans all over the world, including the Arctic. One thing they found there, which stunned other researchers, was that there were large numbers of species which live below the ice. Sometimes under a layer up to
below phải under không? Đó thì nó là ice. Tiếp. 37 nè.
20 meters thick. Some of these species had never been seen before. They've even found species of octopus living in these conditions. And other scientists working on the same project, but researching very different habitats on the ocean floor, have found large numbers of species congregating around volcanoes, attracted to them by the warmth and nutrients there. However, biologists still don't know how serious the threat to their survival is for each individual species. So a body called the Global Marine Species Assessment is now creating a list of endangered species on land, so they consider things like the size of the population, how many members of one species there are in a particular place. and then they look at
37
their
nè.
distribution in geographical terms.
Chuẩn bị 37 nè.
Although this is quite difficult when you're looking at fish because they're so mobile. And then thirdly, they calculate the rate at which the decline of the species is happening.
Rồi nghe được kiểu gì? Rate
So
of
far, only
decline.
1,000
Đó. Decline là sao em? Em ơi, đứng sau of là danh từ, hiểu không? Mà danh từ của decline là decline, hiểu chưa? Tiếp.
1,500 species have been assessed,
38.
but they want to increase this figure to 20,000.
20,000.
For each one they assess, they use the data they collect on that species
Đúng vậy.
to produce a map
A
showing its distribution. Ultimately,
39
they
nè.
will be able to use these to figure out not only where most species are located, but also where they are most threatened. So, finally, what can be done to retain the diversity of species in the world's oceans? Firstly, we need to set up more reserves in our
Reserves
oceans,
nè. Đó, 39
places
chuẩn bị,
where
chuẩn bị.
marine species are protected. We have some, but not enough.
Chuẩn bị nha, cái gì
In
trên sơ đồ
addition,
nha.
to preserve species such as leatherback turtles,
Đó.
which live out in the high seas but have their nesting sites on the American coast, we need to create corridors for migration,
Nghe
so
được
they
chưa?
can
Nghe được
get
cho
from
corridor
one
chưa?
area.
Đó, corridor for cái gì thì mình phải nghe ra cái đó thôi nha. Thì nó sẽ ra được cái từ thôi
They
nha.
seas
Nghe nè.
but have their nesting sites on the American
Rồi, chuẩn
coast.
bị.
We need to create corridors for migration,
Migration.
so they can get from one area to another safely. As well as this, action
Đúng
needs
rồi.
to be taken to lower the levels of fishing quotas,
Fishing
to
quotas.
prevent overfishing of endangered species. And finally, there's the problem of bycatch.
Chuẩn bị 40 nè.
This refers to the catching of unwanted fish by fishing boats. They're returned to the sea, but they're often dead or dying. If these commercial fishing boats used equipment which was more selective so that only the fish wanted for consumption were caught, this problem could be overcome.
Consumption. Only the fish for consumption was caught. Nghĩa là chỉ có bắt cá để tiêu thụ thôi. Consumption. Đó là toàn bộ bài của mình.